Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, today we are going to discuss early medieval history and particularly Indian economy, medieval Indian economy during the period 8th to 12th century as a background to the Delhi Sultanate. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in studio Dr. Bipul Singh. He is Associate Professor in Department of History, University of Delhi, and he has long experience of teaching. And Dr. Singh has written a number of books, and he is also recipient of Karjan Fellowship from German government for the research on environmental history. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic and give insight how to understand the early medieval Indian economy. So on your behalf, I welcome him for the EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, Mr.
Thank you. Good afternoon, friends, students. Today, we are going to discuss the economy of the period 8th to the 12th century, and I'm going to discuss this as a background to the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. Now, you'll be asking a question possibly that why I am using this term or the period of Delhi Sultanate when I am discussing 8th to the 12th century. Now, it is very significant. It is significant in the sense that over the years, many historians have started viewing the establishment of Delhi Sultanate as a major breakthrough in medieval history, as a major breakthrough in terms of economy, society, and cultural development, and also in the technology field. So, we will be looking at the different viewpoints of historians, whether we should consider it as a major breakthrough in the society, economy, and political structure of medieval India, or we should see it in terms of continuity and changes. We shall be doing this aspect maybe in the next lecture in great detail, but today let us start with the scenario during the 8th to the 12th century. As I mentioned earlier, that many historians looked at the establishment of Sultanate as a very important development in terms of political and economy of the medieval India, whereas there are other group of historians whom we call as revisionists. They believe it to be an important interventionist moment and not as a major breakthrough. So the revisionists do not question the very existence of Delhi Sultanate or a very powerful Delhi Sultanate during the medieval times. But what they question is that it was not the Delhi Sultanate, it was not the only Delhi Sultanate, and that is why there are possibilities of various other such kingdoms in existence. They also suggest that Delhi Sultanate was one among many ruling dynasties in the process of formation of state during this period, and therefore it is essential that we look at this process from 8th century onwards rather than taking Delhi Sultanate only as a major break. That is the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate as a major break. So, let us first see what was the political scenario during this period, that is before coming of the Sultans of Delhi. There were a lot of local powers which emerged, and this happened after the disintegration of a major supra-regional kingdom of the Guptas. The Indian Marxist historians viewed this emergence in the context of Indian feudalism, which is highly debatable in the context of India, medieval India. Its defining features being the increase in the land grants. There were a lot of land grants being made during this period, and in fact even the revisionists agree to it that the land grants cannot be denied, that the enhancement in land grants was actually there. So, the profusion of land grants led to the emergence of big landlords. This is what a group of historians argue. Now, the revisionists say that possibly because we tend to compare the period of lot of land grants with that of the earlier supra-regional empires like that of the Mauryas and the Guptas, that we see that there is a kind of a decentralization taking place. So, the proponents of the Indian feudalism model talked about the decentralized polity and emphasized that there were many political centers of power which came, and these political centers of power were in terms of big landlords. The revisionists look at the scenario of the emergence of the regional states in a very different way. They say that the proliferation of the local ruling clans was evident, and this proliferation got transformed into local state and regional state structures. The agriculture also expanded during this period, and the forest area was converted into the cultivable land. The revenue from these newly cultivable land allowed the local powers to enhance their area of authority further. So, the revisionists believe that possibly this episode of land grants and the cultivation of newer areas brought many new elements into the mainstream, and that is how the power of the local communities enhanced, and then it went on to become kingdoms. So, these are the major the summary of a kind of major hypothesis of the two major group of historians who view the 8th to the 12th century in terms of economy and polity. Let us first start with the features of the economy of that period. Now, during the 8th to the 12th century, as I mentioned earlier, the land grants grew in large number, and in fact it was so widespread that in each of the areas of northern India, the land grants was being given. These practice of land grants led to the emergence of big landlords in different regions with different high sounding titles such as Samant and Mahasamant. Now, who were these grantees? Who were the people who got these land grants? These land grants were given to the feudatories, and they were also made to the Brahmanas and the religious establishments, the temples and the monasteries. There were many villages which were donated to the Brahmanas, and there are certain terms, special terms used in the inscriptions, and they are these kind of village grants are known as the Brahmadeya grants. Now, all these grantees use different titles in their own areas. So, we have a variety of titles in different regions in central India or northern India or western India. We have different high sounding titles. So, we hear of the Samantas, Mahasamantas, the Thakurs, and sometimes the Bhoktas also. Now, all these landlords were given land on the condition that they would supply certain quota of soldiers if required by the overlord. Now, this was a kind of an understanding on which the land grants were given. But the scenario changed gradually, and these feudal lords became very powerful in their own areas. Now, given this background, let us see how the historians interpret these developments. The developments during the early medieval period of history has been treated differently, as I mentioned earlier also, and this difference of opinion is largely because of the fact that we don't have a structured account of that period. Whatever the primary sources are available for the period are in terms of inscriptions, coins, and various archaeological excavated materials. So, that is why there is a greater scope of debate among historians, because different historians analyze and treat these primary sources differently. Now, even before this whole idea of Indian feudalism came, the traditional description given by the historians before the 1950s was that this period was a dark phase of Indian history. Dark phase in the sense that we do not have much written sources for the period. As I mentioned earlier also, that the period before this, that is the period of the Guptas, we have a lot of written material available. And immediately after this period, we have the period of the Delhi Sultans, for whom we have also a lot of narratives and chronicles. So, this was a period which historians believed was lacking in terms of primary sources and written materials. So, they believed it to be a dark phase of Indian history. But this whole concept of dark phase actually vanished the moment new sources came into existence, not only in existence, came in light, and many new archaeological excavations showed that there are many other inscriptional records available on the basis of which we can actually write the history of the period. Now, what are the recent perspectives? The new studies have offered fresh perspective, and they are not willing to accept such a bleak description of the period, or we may say the bleak description of a dark age for the period. Instead, historians in the 1960s started treating it as an age of political disintegration and economic disintegration. So, overall, if we have to divide the whole historiography for the period, we can develop two broader models. One is called the changeless model and the other is called the change model. And within the change model, we have this Indian feudalism model and the integrative polity model. Now, what is this changeless hypothesis? The changeless proposition explains that the traditional polity is essentially changeless, and the historians relying on this hypothesis describe the polity in medieval India as traditional and orientally despotic. Now, this term oriental despotic was actually used by Karl Marx, and he termed Indian state in terms of Asiatic mode of production. According to Karl Marx, this Asiatic mode of production was a system in which there was an absolute power in the hands of orientally despotic rulers. Through this explanation of the Asiatic mode of production, Marx tries to exclude India from the orthodox mode of production, in which he has already described that there were slave societies and the feudal societies, and then on the societies moved on to capitalist one. So, here he says that since we do not have a slave and a feudal society, we directly moved on to capitalist society from an Asiatic mode of production, and this happened with the coming of the British. One of the important followers of Karl Marx was a historian called Karl Wittfogel. Wittfogel was influenced by the Marxist ideology, and he argued that the Asiatic mode differs from the feudal mode. And he says that why it differs? Because there are contractual elements which is an essential component of a feudal mode of production, and this was absent in the entire Asia, including in India. So, he says that in the Asiatic mode, there was a total submission to the despotic ruler. And to prove this point, he takes up the example of irrigation mode in Asia and India. He says that the Asian society depended on the construction of large scale irrigation works, what he calls as a hydraulic society, and this could be achieved only by a despotic state. Now, the Indian Marxist scholars like Professor R.S. Sharma, Professor Irfan Habib and various others have criticized Karl Marx's model of Asiatic mode of production. They say that this changeless model, in which the whole period was clubbed together with the earlier period, calling it as kind of an Asiatic mode or a rule of the despotic regimes, is not correct. They say that this changeless model looked at the early medieval economy and society as highly static, which was not actually the case if we look at the various inscriptional records. The recent researches have certainly shown that the period witnessed many dynamics of changes. So, the change hypothesis is now almost an acceptable phenomena in terms of early medieval period of Indian history. Now, these writings of the change hypothesis are basically, it got started with a centralized state model, and historians were only slightly different from what Marx was talking about. So, in this centralized state model, the historians conceived the territories and its rule only in terms of dynastic changes, which is not very far off from what Marx was suggesting. Marx was also saying the similar thing, that there were changes in the regimes, and these regimes were ruled by the despotic rulers. Then came the Indian feudalism model. Now, one of the first persons to have used the term feudalism was D.D. Koshambi, who gave a conceptual definition of the term feudalism, and he used it in the context of feudalism from above and feudalism from below. Now, from feudalism from above, Koshambi meant that it was a kind of a state wherein the king levied tribute from the subordinates, who still ruled in their own rights as long as they paid the king. They did what they liked in their territory, and Koshambi also goes on to explain that in this feudalism from above, the taxes were collected directly by the royal officials. In his second phrase, feudalism from below, Koshambi meant that it was a kind of a stage where a class of landowners developed between the state and the peasantry within the village to wield armed power over the local population. And in this feudalism from below, taxes were collected by small intermediaries who passed on a fraction of this collection to the feudal hierarchy. Now, R.S. Sharma improvised on this whole idea of feudalism from above and feudalism from below, and he coined a new term called the Indian feudalism for the entire period. He argued that the period between 1750 to 1200 was a period when a number of changes took place in the Indian society and economy. And then Professor Sharma gives various features of these Indian kind of feudalism. He gives evidences of a number of land grants, which is evident from various inscriptional records. Then he also says that how the hereditary landholders gradually assumed many of the functions of the government, and they not only were collecting revenue, but they were also doing some administrative works. They were in fact so powerful that they were also awarding punishments to the people living in his area of dominance. They also assumed the right to sublet their lands, what Professor Sharma calls as sub-infeudation. R.S. Sharma says that this situation was further aggravated by a decline in urbanism and trade, particularly in foreign trade. Another feature of this period highlighted by him was the paucity of coins, and he says that this paucity of coin indicates that there was not much trade or trading activity taking shape. So, on the basis of this evidence of non-availability of coins, Sharma argues that there was a decline of trade as well. And resultantly, he also believes that there was decline of urban centers. So, what was the crux of Professor Sharma's argument? The crux of his argument is that the feudal polity emerged from the gradual breakdown of a centralized bureaucratic state system. And this process actually gradually eroded the authority of the state, and this resulted in the weakened sense of sovereignty. So, he says that because of this, there was a kind of a vertical gradation of the power, there was a division of sovereignty, and there were emergence of separate category of semi-independent rulers, which are referred as Samantas or Mahan Samantas. Professor Sharma also emphasizes on a term called Vishti, which he says that it was used for the forced labor. He argues that the forced labor was originally a prerogative of the king or the state, but gradually it got transferred to the grantees also and the petty officials. As a result, a kind of serfdom emerged, in which the agricultural laborers were reduced to the position of semi-serfs. So, he says that it was not a complete slavery, but there was a semi-serfdom in existence. However, later on another historian, Professor Harbans Mukhia, says that this situation of Begar or Vishti was an exceptional case, and it was not a very general case, it was not a very general phenomena as Professor Sharma would like us to believe. R.S. Sharma also highlights the conditions of the peasants during those days, and he says that the peasants experienced severe curtailment of their land rights. They were reduced to the position of tenants, and they faced ever growing threat of eviction from their land. They were also subjected to a lot of taxes, and they were also supposed to do labor work. They were also deprived of the right to move from one place to another, and that is why R.S. Sharma says that it was a kind of a semi-serfdom. Harbans Mukhia questioned the very use of the term feudalism in Indian history. He is of the opinion that Indian feudalism could well have been a non-existent and make-believe construct for which there are no major supporting evidences. And he emphasizes that in the European context, feudalism emerged due to the changes in society whereas in India, R.S. Sharma says that the establishment of feudalism has been attributed to the state practice of making land grants. So, there is a major difference in the fundamentals of feudalism, even if we use the term in the context of India. Mukhya also questions the very existence of serfdom, and he believes that the Indian peasantry has always been a free peasant. In order to prove his point, Harbans Mukhya compares the Indian scenario with the European scenario. He does this to prove that why the term feudalism is not possible or relevant in the context of India. The first major comparison that he draws attention to was in terms of ecology. He says that the Indian ecology was marked by almost 10 months of sunshine, which is a fact that Indian agriculture is conducive to such agricultural processes, and that is why the agricultural lands are so productive. It is because of 10 months of sunshine that we also see double croppings taking place in India. He says that because of this intense heat followed by rainfall, the upper crust of the soil made the land more fertile, and therefore it did not require a very deep and intensive labor. So he says that in such a situation, slaves were actually not required. Then he talks about the type of bull that was used for plowing. He says that the Indian bulls used to be humped bull, and it allowed the Indian peasants to use the bull's draught power to the maximum, because they used to put the plows on the back of the bull, that is his soldier, and the humped bull used to act as kind of obstruction for the plow to go in front when the bull used to pull it. So this allowed the peasantry to use the bulls for plowing, and that is why the slaves were not much required for plowing the field. In comparison, the European bulls could not support the plow, which was inevitably plain, and that is why it used to slide down towards the neck of the bull when it was being pulled. So it was not possible for the Europeans to use bull's power for cultivating the field, and that is why they use slaves a lot for cultivation. The other comparison that Professor Harbans Mukhya draws attention to is about the land productivity. He says that the land productivity was much higher in medieval India, as most of the Indian lands yielded to 2 crops a year, and this was something unheard of in Europe until the 19th century. All these differences make it imperative that the form of labor use in agriculture should follow a different pattern in India. And therefore, Harbans Mukhya concludes that the medieval Indian system was marked by a free peasant economy and not by the semi-serfs. Now, what are the other recent perspectives? Bidu Chattopadhyay is one of the leading historians who has questioned the Indian feudalism model other than Harbans Mukhya. Chattopadhyay agrees that the existence of land grants cannot be denied. But then he says that this does not help to explain the origin of the feudal polity. He says that this development was actually to be seen in a micro level and not at the macro level. And once we look at these developments at the micro level, we will get a different picture. Chattopadhyay's major argument is that the pre-state polities gradually evolved into state polities. It was this which resulted in the assimilation of local polity into larger state structure, and he explains that the establishment of larger polities took place in the nuclear areas. He also talks about the peasantization of the tribes during those periods. As I just mentioned before, that there was an expansion of agricultural settlement. Now, this development was heightened by the improvement of agricultural techniques and the transformation of tribal groups into peasant groups. What he calls, B.D. Chattopadhyay calls as peasantization of the tribes. Now, this peasantization helped in the colonization of new areas, and there emerged a new state structure. The new political powers actually emerged through the expansion of these smaller powers into newer areas, and this actually led to the emergence of larger state polities. So, the model developed by Chattopadhyay is called the integrative polity. That is, it integrates the various political structures together and creates a larger political unit. This integrative polity model linked the process of formation of the state polities with economic and social processes. So, the disintegration model, which talked about the declining central authority, the decline in trade, the decline in centers of urban centers, is diametrically opposite to the integration model which Chattopadhyay presents. In this, we see the emergence of new states, we see the trade being flourished, and we see the new urban centers coming into existence. So, the growth of trade and urban centers is an important element in the integrative polity model pushed forward by B.D. Chattopadhyay. He says that various new urban centers came into existence at the cost of the old towns. he has given an example of various new such urban centers, and not only the urban centers, various new trading centers also came into existence. He gives example of one of the new urban centers which came into existence during those days, and that is the Tadantapur, which is identified with the Ahar near Bulandshahr in the upper Gangetic basin. The other important urban centers of this period which Chattopadhyay mentions are the Siodhani in Jhansi area and Gopalgiri in Gwalior. He says that in these areas we also get evidences of the Sreshthis and the Sartavas, who were basically trading associations. Chattopadhyay explains that the urban character of the settlement emerged from the use of the suffix pura, and he says that we should treat all these pura as a kind of third urbanization taking place in Indian history. Many new towns, as I mentioned earlier, came up, and the old towns like Varanasi, Kanyakubj, Thaneshwar, they also continued to flourish. He also talks about the construction of new architecture in these urban areas, and this was not possible without the flourishing economy. John S. Dale is one of the historians who has written a book titled as Living Without Silver. He also argues that this period was a period of no financial crisis. He says that this non-availability of coins, which R.S. Sharma talks about, should not be treated as evidence of financial crisis. Rather, he says that a situation of increasing demand of coins was a big possibility during this period. He says that just because there was a dearth of supply of silver during those days in all around the world, the traders started using the cowries as a mode of exchange. And then he also gives evidence of the use of the term hundika, which was used as a bill of exchange during those days by the traders. We also get evidence of the trade relation with the Arab world ever since the 9th century. The trading relation with Southeast Asia and China also started after 1000 AD, and there are evidences of flourishing trade in Western India as well. We often get mention of tall houses called the Shulka Mandapikas, which indicates that the commerce actually prospered and was an important source of income for the state. So, to conclude our discussion, we may suggest that the stereotypical construction of Indian feudalism has been subjected to a radical reappraisal over the last 2 decades. The integrative polity model has gained much popularity in recent years because this model through its new evidences, tries to accommodate the long-term dynamics of change in Indian history. The recent researches also indicate towards a prosperous period of economy, and then it talks about the continuity of these various regional kingdoms in areas which were not ruled by the Delhi Sultans later on. So in a way, we can treat this period of 8th to the 12th century as a background to understand the scenario in which the Turks came to rule in India. So we shall be discussing the coming of the Turks and the changes that are taking place in the Indian economy and society after that in the next lecture. Thank you so much.
Sir, you talked about the hydraulic society. Can you throw light upon that? What was exactly, what you mean by that hydraulic society?
See, this hydraulic society was a concept which was used by Karl Wittfogel. He was a German scholar. Karl Wittfogel was, in his early years, he was highly influenced by Marx and his ideology. And when Marx talked about the Asiatic mode of production as a terminology to define the polity and the economy of India and societies of India like and various other countries in Asia, Karl Wittfogel tried to strengthen that argument.
Okay.
And in order to strengthen this argument, he gives example of irrigation technologies. And he gives evidences of how the state sponsored irrigation technologies were being used in such orientally despotic societies.
Okay.
So with this,
but does his idea or the concept match with the Indian society the way it was in those days?
no, in reality, although many works came after that, what Wittfogel is talking about is the state sponsored irrigation system. He gives, you can take, we have the example in history of Firoz Shah Tughlaq making huge canals, large canals. Shah Jahan also built large canals. But there are also evidences of many wells, many local level dams which were constructed by the local communities and the villagers. So these were largely community based irrigation methodologies, and these were not sponsored by the state. So possibly Wittfogel has not seen the larger irrigation technologies in existence during the medieval times, which was being done at the local level.
Okay. So we will discuss more about the economy of after 12th century. So can you just briefly talk about the literature or the things which students should read before coming to the next lectures?
Yes, we have a lot of literatures on the history of Delhi Sultanates. Since we are going to talk about the economy of Delhi Sultanate in the next class, I think it is better that the students should read one of my books that is titled as Interpreting Medieval India is there, and there is one recent book by Irfan Habib called The Economy of Medieval India, which has been published in 2010 only, and this book is very lucidly written. This is apart from his other work which was written many years ago, which is titled as Cambridge Economic History of India Volume 1,
Okay.
which he wrote along with Tapan Ray Chaudhary. It's an edited volume.
Okay.
But I think that a student must read this new Irfan Habib book, The Economy of Medieval India. It's a very interesting book.
Okay, so well friends, with these words we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. Bipul Kumar Singh for giving such a wonderful lecture on a specific topic. Thank you very much.